Almost 9 years ago, I heard about the School for Leadership Training held each January at Eastern Mennonite Seminary, and I decided to make the pilgrimage to Harrisonburg, Virginia to attend. I don't remember how I found out about it, but it was at the beginning of my sensing that I was being called into some kind of vocation different from the legal editing and elementary school teaching I had done up to that point. The topic was also really interesting to me: discernment. Not only was I in a place of personal vocational discernment, but one of the reasons discernment became the topic of this 3-day seminar was a heightened attention to and debate around different topics in the church, including the question of LGBTQ inclusion in church and denominational settings. This was true for the Mennonites and the Church of the Brethren and the Methodists, among others, particularly in the mid-2010s. Thankfully, many congregations and a growing number of Christian groups, including Elizabethtown Church of the Brethren, have affirmed the well-being and flourishing of all, including our LGBTQ siblings. But a variety of interpretive lenses looking at Scripture continue to wrestle with navigating this sensitive topic. Anyway, all that to say that this period of time was emotionally charged, both on a large church scale and in my own personal life. The speaker for this conference was Ruth Haley Barton, and the topic was specifically discernment in the face of difficult issues. Ruth Haley Barton is an author and director of the Transforming Center in Illinois, and her work is focused on spiritual transformation practices for leaders, groups, and individuals. In a box somewhere in our house are likely many pages of scribbled notes from that conference. But one thing that I very clearly remember from both her presentation and her writings is this idea: the most important thing you bring to leadership and spiritual discernment is your own transforming self. Let me say that again. The most important thing you bring to leadership and spiritual discernment is your own transforming self. Now you can hear that and say, oh good, Naomi and the pastors and the board are on top of it. They've got that leadership thing covered. No. We'll explore this more during our next sermon series in October, but we have this fascinating thing that's been going on in the Church of the Brethren for about the last 300 years or so, where we believe that we are all ministers, we are all leaders, we are all involved in charting the course for our congregation, and therefore we are all involved in discernment processes, and we are all responsible to bring our whole selves, our transforming selves, to the table, to the conversation. This conference a few years ago, though, was really the first time that I had seriously considered the importance of the continual need to grow and transform, and that I wasn't expected to come to the table done, complete. That was a major learning for me. So what does this have to do with building peace, you might ask? One of the classes I'm teaching across the street this semester at the college is called Artistic Peace Building, and I bring the following premise to this course. The arts are a unique way to build peace, and in this course we explore how visual art, music, theater, dance, film, photography, and literature can be a means for building peace by bearing witness, communicating important ideas, giving space for grief and mourning and joy, and by the very nature of collaborative creation. But at the same time, peace building is, in and of itself, a creative act. We don't attempt to transform conflict by doing the same thing that got us into the place of conflict. Peace building is about, at least in part, I believe, trying something new, creatively imagining a new future, a new possibility, a new world where peace, justice, mercy, and love are the primary colors. My co-instructor for this artistic peace-building course is Kevin Shorner Johnson, an ethnomusicologist, music educator, dean of the School of Arts and Humanities, and all around a pretty nice guy. He led a drumming workshop last week during our class on Thursday morning. Students were playing a variety of instruments and a variety of simultaneous patterns on those instruments. But it starts with the self. First, one group or one person learns their part. Bum, ba bum. Bum, ba bum. Then another group learns their part. Ch, 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 ch. Ch, 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 ch. Gradually, we started putting pieces together, one and two together, listening now not only to self, but also paying attention to how your own pattern falls in place with your neighbor. Then another is added, and then another, until all are playing together. Eventually, if you play long enough, you start to pay less attention to the rhythm you individually are playing, even if only for a moment, and you are swept up in the sound and the experience of the whole group, the combined effort. Have you ever experienced that? You enter into a time and space when you feel completely connected to each other, like there really are no others. You are all one. You start to notice the fullness of the rhythm all together, with no individual instrument standing out. It feels like it is one creation, unity of movement, yet beautiful in its multiplicity. This doesn't happen by itself, automatically. It starts with learning our own part. It starts with practicing our piece. It starts with focusing on ourself. Matthew 22, verses 35 through 40. And one of the Pharisees, an expert in religious law, asked Jesus a question to test him. "Teacher, which commandment in the law is the greatest?" Jesus said to him, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. The second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets depend on these two commandments." I'd also like to hear it from the Message. "Teacher, which command in God's law is the most important?" Jesus said, "Love the Lord your God with all your passion and prayer and intelligence. This is the most important, the first on any list. But there is a second to set alongside it. Love others as well as you love yourself." Love the Lord your God with all your passion and prayer and intelligence. Love others. Love yourself. This text is set within a part of Matthew's narrative that is hyper-focused on conflict. Jesus is being grilled by religious leaders. They're trying to trip him up, get him to say something that will prove he's a fraud. Out of this tension-filled account, Jesus' words emerge. Let's put it in context. Jesus is already in Jerusalem by this point in Matthew's text. He has already ridden the donkey in, and the crowds have already shouted, "Hosanna." He has flipped the money changers' tables in the temple. He went out of the city, spent the night in Bethany, and came back to Jerusalem the next day. And he is continuing to teach and tell parables. And then the religious leaders start asking him questions. Is it right to pay taxes to the emperor? If a woman has been married to multiple brothers, as the law prescribes, whose wife will she be after the resurrection? And then finally, teacher, which commandment in God's law is the most important? This is a familiar text for many of us, sometimes known as the Great Commandment. Interestingly, these words were familiar even to Jesus. They weren't new to this gospel account. As often happens in the Gospel of Matthew, the author is reaching back into the Hebrew scriptures. The first most important commandment that Jesus cites is from Deuteronomy 6, verses 4 and 5, and it is known as the Shema, which means hear or listen. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord alone. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your might. The second commandment that Jesus names is from Leviticus 19, verse 18. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. The part that catches my attention is the very last part, as yourself. After that workshop that I attended at Eastern Mennonite Seminary with Ruth Barton, I started seeing this idea pop up in other places too. Other readings and other things I heard, this idea that we need to start with ourselves to continue learning about ourselves and discerning how we best meet God in particular places and particular activities. I noticed it outside of Christian writings as well. Thich Nhat Hanh and the Dalai Lama and Gandhi. First, we must find inner peace, peace within ourselves, glimpses here and there. And that is a continual process. I don't think it is ever fully done. And only then can we continue to work with God and allow God to work through us in ways that are unique to our gifts and our passions and our personalities. As much as I have often looked for a flashing neon sign to tell me what it exactly is that I'm supposed to be doing with my life, for most of us, most of the time, that's not how it works. Which means we need to spend time figuring it out, discerning how God is working in our lives and what our next step on this journey of a faithful life should look like. I don't think we can fully love God or love our neighbor if we have not taken the time to get to know ourselves and love and care for ourselves. That may sound self-absorbed and selfish, but I really don't think it is. Interestingly, when we spend this time focusing on caring and learning about ourselves with an eye toward how we bring that to loving our neighbor and God, we end up peacefully and joyfully losing ourselves in the process. Our drum part seamlessly blends with the others. We have a pretty good model from Jesus. More than once, across all of the gospel accounts, we are told that Jesus engaged in practices that drew him away from the crowd, spending time alone in prayer, listening to and talking to God, discerning and learning about his next steps. Solitude, self-examination, paying attention to what feels life-giving and what feels life-draining. Noticing what activities or settings or roles bring joy and a sense of self-worth and make it seem like time passes with ease. A sense that the fit is natural. The thing you wake up in the morning ready to do again. In the words of Frederick Buechner, the place where your deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meet. I don't think we can find that place if we don't spend time learning about and caring about ourselves. Only then can we come together and love our neighbor and love God with all of our heart and soul and mind, with all of our passion and prayer and intelligence. Humans are not stagnant, static creatures. We must do this over and over and over again. Like the combination of percussion instruments, first self, then neighbor, and then God, the whole, the Spirit, the way. We cannot be right with God, and we cannot be right with our neighbor and our community until we are right with ourselves. Over the next few weeks, you will begin to hear about some small group listening sessions that we will be holding between about mid-October and mid-November. These will be one-time sessions guided with a facilitator, and it will be a chance to both listen to others and have a chance to be heard. You may have pain and fear that you are carrying. Hopefully, we all have hopes and dreams for what this congregation might be becoming. This will be an opportunity for those things to rise to the surface as we continue to discern who we are as a community and where we are heading. The peace of our community in these sessions, these conversations, will be best served by us each individually practicing, preparing in some way to find love and peace within ourselves before we attempt to create such a thing with others. Next Sunday's Love Feast experience might be one opportunity for that. We will begin with worship and communion in the sanctuary, and then we will move to the fellowship hall for a light meal together and an opportunity for feet washing and assembly of hygiene kits as a service project. The Love Feast experience is a traditional Church of the Brethren ritual, memorializing Jesus' last meal with his disciples. It includes practices that bring us together in love as a unique community committed to practicing peace, service, and openness to all. And this modified Love Feast experience next week is our attempt to truly live out each of those goals. As you begin to consider your participation in Love Feast, traditionally the brethren have engaged in the week prior, or weeks, when deacons and elders traveled from house to house, in the practice of examination. Jason will likely talk about this more next week, but the traditional questions were around self-reflection of one's relationship with others and the church. Are you at peace with one another? Are you at peace with God? Do you continue to be willing to participate in the work of this body and what we are doing together? Sometimes the answer to one or more of those questions is no. Then what? Matthew 5:23 and 24. So when you are going to worship and offer your gift, if you remember an issue that your sibling has with you, go and be reconciled with your sibling, and then come back to worship and offer your gift. Notice how all of this, these self-examination questions, the words of Jesus, are focused towards one's own responsibility for self-work before peace with neighbor and community can be attained. It is inseparable, this love for self, neighbor, and God. If we are to truly love God with all of our heart, soul, and mind, our passion, our prayer, our intelligence, let it begin within us each. As I close, I want to share with you about this person, Peace Pilgrim. The hymn we sang earlier after children's time, Peace Be Still, was written by Sean Kirchner, who many of us know as a very accomplished pianist and choral composer. That hymn is also known as Peace Pilgrim's Prayer, and it was inspired by the words of prayer that Peace Pilgrim often used. Peace, be still, and know that I am God. Mildred Lizette Norman was born in 1908 in Egg Harbor City, New Jersey. A variety of life experiences led her to change her name to Peace Pilgrim, and she began to walk across the United States in 1953 on a pilgrimage for peace. By 1964, she had completed 25,000 miles on foot, walked the entire Appalachian Trail in one season. She was the first female to do so. Visited each state capital, walked at least 100 miles in each state and each Canadian province. In total, she eventually completed more than 6 cross-country walks before her death in 1981. A living demonstration of what one individual can do to be a model and vision for peace. Self, neighbor, God. In the words of Peace Pilgrim herself, "There is no glimpse of the light without walking the path. You can't get it from anyone else, nor can you give it to anyone. Just take whatever steps seem easiest for you, and as you take a few steps, it will be easier for you to take a few more." Ultimate peace begins within. When we find peace within, there will be no more conflict, no more occasion for war. If this is the peace you seek, purify your body by sensible living habits, purify your mind by expelling all negative thoughts, purify your motives by casting out any ideas of greed or self-striving, and by seeking to serve your fellow human beings. Purify your desires by eliminating all wishes for material possessions or self-glorification, and by desiring to know and do God's will for you. Inspire others to do likewise. This is the way of peace. Overcome evil with good, falsehood with truth, and hatred with love. May it be so.